As Reverend Kowalski lights our chalice this morning, I invite you to speak aloud our affirmation. You're welcome to stand. And if you're online, please keep muted so people can hear themselves. The words are printed in the chat line. Join me. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need. For these high purposes, do we unite in worship.
Everyone needs a wise teacher, a guide, a mentor in their life. And the best teachers are the ones who have heart knowledge, whose learning doesn't just come from books, who convey a message with the power and example of their lives. And the finest teachers seem to understand the real meaning of the word education, which comes from a root that means to lead out. They're not trying to impose their ideas on other people. They're trying to bring out the student's own inward appreciation of the truth. And the lessons that they're trying to teach are the ones that we're all trying to learn. How to live without anger or regret or bitterness. Where to find serenity. What our priorities ought to be so we don't come to the end of our days having spent our lives on meaningless pursuits and coming up empty-handed and alone. How to be happy, how to face death with calm and courage. For some, the instructor might be a figure like Jesus, whom his disciples called rabbi or teacher. And more modern biblical scholars are starting to think about the historical Jesus in that role, kind of a wandering sage who challenged his listeners to a deeper understanding of what it means to live fully and compassionately as sisters and brothers, as one family like God intended. It's said in the scriptures that people marveled when he taught because he spoke not as the scribes and the Pharisees. The scribes were the ones who copied down and memorized the ancient texts. He spoke as one who knew firsthand, who had authority. But authority comes in all shapes and sizes. For some, the teacher might be male. For some, female. For some, the teacher might even be a little old man with horn-rimmed glasses and bristly hair and a crooked, toothy grin. He could be living in West Newton, Massachusetts, instead of ancient Palestine or in some far-off exotic ashram. He could even be someone like Maury Schwartz, more of a wise guy than a stereotypical wise man. Maury became the teacher for millions of people when ABC's Nightline decided to document the last few months of his life when he was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. And he inspired many more through the writings of his former student, Mitch Albom, who reconnected with his favorite professor from his undergraduate years as a student at Brandeis, and then recorded the weekly conversations that they shared during the dying man's passage, which became the basis for his book, Tuesdays with Maury. Albom relates how Maury had gone out of his way to befriend him when he was a college student. Maury was one of those rare college professors who took an interest in his pupils outside the classroom. He actually sat down and got involved in those sophomore bowl sessions about the meaning of life. He encouraged his students to dream big. This was during the Vietnam War, and he gave all the boys in his class A's and encouraged other faculty to do the same so that they wouldn't lose their student deferments and get drafted. For Mitch, Maury became as much a father figure as a thesis advisor. And after graduating, Mitch promised to stay in touch, but he didn't follow through. He let the relationship lapse. He got caught up in his own career, climbing the ladder of success, never gave his old professor another thought until he saw him one night on national TV being interviewed by Ted Koppel, being asked what it felt like to know that he was dying. Mitch's story reminds me of another tale that Jesus told, a story about a prodigal son. There's a father who has two boys. One wanders off as soon as he's grown. He disappears. He cuts off contact with his family. He squanders his fortune, ruins his health, till he has no resources left, and then he comes back home with his tail between his legs. And the father throws a big banquet to welcome his wayward child back, and the older brother, who's stayed dutifully at home and tended to all the family responsibilities, he's hurt, he's outraged by the reception that his sibling receives. But the father's attitude is, what else can he do but rejoice and celebrate that his lost son is home again. So Mitch feels like a nebbish, like a nobody, calling Maury up after such a long absence. It's been years since they said goodbye to each other at college graduation, but Maury welcomes the prodigal home with open arms. I can't tell you why he received me so warmly. I was hardly the promising student who'd left him 16 years earlier. Had it not been for Nightline, Maury would have died probably without ever seeing me again. I had no good excuse for this, except the one everyone these days seems to have. I was busy. I was wrapped up in the siren song of my own life. What had happened to me? I asked myself. Maury's high, smoky voice came back to me, reminding me of my university years, when I thought that rich people were evil, when I thought that a suit and a tie were prison clothes, when life without the freedom to get up and go, that was no good life at all. What had happened to me? The 80s happened, the 90s happened, death and sickness and getting fat and going bald happened. I traded lots of dreams for a bigger paycheck and never even realized I was doing it. Yet here was Maury talking with wonder of our college years as if I'd just been gone on a long vacation. Have you found someone to share your heart with? He asked. Are you giving to your community? Are you at peace with yourself? Are you as human as you can be? I squirmed, wanting to show that I'd been grappling deeply with these kinds of questions, but what had happened to me? I'd once promised myself I'd never work for money, that I'd join the Peace Corps, that I'd live in beautiful, inspirational places. Instead, I'd been in Detroit for 10 years, at the same workplace, using the same bank, visiting the same barber. I was 37, more efficient than in college, tied to computers and modems and cell phones. My days were full, yet I remained, most of the time, unsatisfied. What had happened? To answer that question, Mitch and Maury embark on their last tutorial, a class in what it's all about, and living, dying, the meaning of existence taught in the professor's old home. There's no reading list required. Assignments include some physical tasks like lifting Maury's head and putting it on the pillow. Topics covered include the meaning of life. Overhearing this exchange is a little like listening to the Sermon on the Mount delivered in a Bronx accent with a little wry Jewish humor thrown in. But probably Jesus didn't speak in Elizabethan cadences either, despite everything the King James translators did to make him sound like Laurence Olivier. He talked in simple, everyday language, like Maury, and the lessons were largely the same. Share and care. Forgive and forget. Money and material possessions do not buy inward satisfaction. This is a big theme for both of them. You know, if you remember your Sunday school, you can hardly turn a page of the Gospels without running across some commentary on worldly wealth, about camels passing through the eyes of needles, the rich man and Lazarus. Don't lay up treasures for yourself here on earth where rust corrodes and thieves break in. Lay up treasures in heaven, because where your treasure is, there your heart is also. This is how Maury puts it. Wherever I went in my life, I met people who wanted to gobble up something new, gobble up a new car, gobble up a new piece of property, and then they wanted to tell you all about it. Guess what I got? Guess what I got? You know how I interpreted that? These were people so hungry for love that they accepted substitutes. They were embracing material things and expecting a kind of hug back. But it never works. You can't substitute material stuff for love or tenderness. As I sit here dying, I can tell you that when you most need it, neither money nor power will give you that feeling that you're looking for, no matter how much of them you have. I glanced at Maury's study. It was the same today as it had been the first day I arrived. The papers were cluttering the same old desk. The outside rooms hadn't been improved or upgraded. In fact, Maury hadn't really bought anything new except for medical equipment in a long time, maybe years. The day he learned he was terminally ill was the day he lost all interest in his purchasing power. So the TV was the same old model. The car that his wife Charlotte drove was the same old model. The dishes, the silverware, the towels, all the same. And yet the house had changed drastically. It had filled with love and teaching and communication, filled with family and honesty and family and tears. It had filled with colleagues and students and meditation teachers and therapists and a cappella groups. It had become, in a very real way, a wealthy home, even though Maury's bank account was rapidly being depleted. Caring really is what matters most, more than money, more than possessions. People matter. Give your heart away, and life's joy comes flowing back in. The kingdom of heaven really is among us, between us. It's in the quality of our interactions with each other. Love your neighbors. Love your enemies. Love sinners. Love publicans. Love republicans. That's a teaching that almost all the great wise men and wise women agree on. Jesus was visiting the home of a Pharisee when a woman who was a sinner came through the door and began to anoint his feet. And the Pharisee said, if this man were a real prophet, he wouldn't even let that kind of woman touch him. But he calls Jesus teacher and asks him to explain. And Jesus responds that it doesn't matter what the woman did in her past life or how much she sinned. What counts is how much she's loved. Loving is more important than being pure or being smart, or being right. Mitch remembers his student days when Maury put it this way. In the campus bookstore, I shop for items on Maury's reading list. I purchase books that I never even knew existed, titles like Youth, Identity, and Crisis, I and Thou, The Divided Self. Before college, I didn't know that the study of human relations was a thing that could be considered scholarly. Until I met Maury, I didn't believe it, but his passion for books is contagious. We begin to talk seriously sometimes after class when the room is emptied, and it's at these times that I realize that he really is a professor and not an uncle. One afternoon, I'm complaining about the confusion of my age, what's expected of me, versus what I want for myself. Have I told you about the tension of opposites, he says. No, the tension of opposites. Life is a series of pulls back and forth. You want to do one thing, but you're bound to do something else. Something hurts you even though you know that it shouldn't hurt you. You take certain things for granted, even though you know you shouldn't take anything for granted. A tension of opposites, like the pull on a rubber band, and most of us live somewhere in the middle. Sounds like a wrestling match, I say. A wrestling match, he laughs. Yeah, you could describe life that way. So which side wins, I ask? Which side wins? He smiles at me with the crinkled eyes, the crooked teeth. Love wins. Love always wins. The test is to go on loving even when life is hard. When others disappoint us, in the midst of conflict, in the face of adversity. And the greatest challenge is to go on loving and appreciating and celebrating life even in the presence of death. Everyone dies, even the young and the innocent who don't deserve it. Even the most exalted and noble and godlike. It's part of what the Easter story says to me, but what Easter also says is that it nonetheless remains possible to rejoice in life despite the sorrowful and tragic endings that are so much a part of human experience. Take away all the supernatural aspects, because you don't have to believe in heaven or an empty tomb or a bodily resurrection or an immortal soul or any of that. Take that all away, although you can believe those things if you want to. But take all the miracles away, and in the Gospels you still have this affirmation that despite the death of Jesus, life goes on, love continues, hope continues, even humor persists, which may be the greatest miracle of all. As the paralysis overtakes Maury's body, it starts to get into his lungs where it's all going to end, but the disease doesn't affect his funny bone. Maury wanted to be cremated. The rabbi from Brandeis, Al Axelrad, a longtime friend who had consented to conduct the funeral, had come to visit Maury. Maury told him about his plans, and Al, he said, "Don't let them overcook me." The rabbi was stunned, but Maury was able to joke about his body now. The closer he got to the end, the more he saw it as just a shell, a container for his soul. It was withering away. It was a useless container of skin and bones now, which made it easier to let go. "We're so afraid of the sight of death," Maury told me when I sat down. He coughed and was coughing all the time now. The oxygen tube was up his nose, and I hated the sight of it. It symbolized helpless to me. I wanted to pull it out. "Last night," Maury said softly. "Yes?" "I had a terrible spell. It went on for hours, and I wasn't really sure I was going to make it. No breath, no end to the choking. At one point, I started to get dizzy, and then I felt a certain peace. I was ready to let go. His eyes widened. Mitch, it was the most incredible thing, the sensation of accepting what was happening, of being at peace. I was thinking about a dream I had last week where I was crossing a bridge over into something unknown, being ready to move on to whatever's next. But you didn't. Maury waited for a moment and shook his head slightly. No, I didn't, he said. But I felt that I could. Do you understand that? That's what we're all looking for, a certain peace with dying. If we know in the end that we can ultimately have that peace with dying, then we can really do the hard thing, which is make peace with living. Peace is my parting gift to you, says Jesus to his disciples at the end. My own peace, such as the world cannot give, set your troubled hearts at rest. Banish all your fears. I think that's the peace that Maury is talking about. It comes from a deep sense of trust and acceptance of the order of the universe, of birth and growth and aging and death. It comes from feeling part of nature where beginnings and endings flow in endless procession. It comes from a willingness to embrace and venture into the unknown, into that great mystery from which we all emerge and to which we all return. It comes from having lived life to the full, having laughed and wept and danced and labored and loved and lost and grieved and loved some more. Make peace with dying, and you make peace with living. Take it from an old professor, or take it from the Bible, or take it from me, but take it. And now may the peace that passes understanding, the peace of God which the world can neither give nor take away, be with us now and when Tuesday comes.